Hi, and welcome to the Examine Life. And today, what I wanted to do was I wanted to respond as well as maybe react. This nice reaction video to some comments that were left on this particular video that I made last year. It's called Narcissistic Therapist. And I had kind of wanted to dedicate this channel to talking specifically about that topic. And I kind of got off the path a little bit because I started talking about different types of narcissists, But I wanted to do a series, and I had thought about it for quite a while, and about how to break it down, because it's not that simple to talk about this, and it's because there's so many layers to it, as well as my own experience. But I did wanted to read some comments by some of my viewers, and I just wanted to respond to them and flesh it out a little bit in responding to those things. So let me start off with this one that I received about 2 days ago, and I'll read it to you, and then I'll just kind of give you my opinion as to the things that he's talking about here. So he says, "Great video. This is a huge problem in the mental health field, and I would say is much more common than many realize." Absolutely. However, I don't think the problem is simply that many narcissists work in the mental health system. I think it's more complicated than that. Absolutely. And I'm going to go flesh it out in in some videos that I'm going to be making very soon about different things that are related to this. Another factor that leads to the unethical treatment of clients is the stigma that revolves around the concept of mental illness and the dehumanization of vulnerable people. Absolutely. In my own experience, seeing various therapists and even peer counselors, I witnessed clients being made fun of, laughed at, gossiped about, and lied to, and none of these so-called professionals are ever held accountable. Okay, so let me just stop there for a second and just let's say, absolutely, they're not held accountable, and partly because the whole system is narcissistic / psychopathic, for lack of a better way to put it. Their bosses, okay, let's say, for example, that the psychotherapist that you're seeing is part of an organization, maybe a nonprofit organization, or maybe even a city or a state type of mental health thing. They usually the city or the state will usually hire some type of outsourcing when it comes to that. So a hospital or some type of private therapist type of thing. But anyways, when you have like several psychotherapists, so you go let's say you go to a clinic, a mental health clinic, and they have several psychotherapists there, but they have a big top person who is usually maybe a psychiatrist or a psychologist who has the full, PhD, because you don't necessarily have to have a PhD to be a psychotherapist. Okay, you can have a master's degree as long as you're licensed, depending on what state you're in. Some states may not necessarily have licensing. I'm really surprised at that in this day and age if they didn't, because recently the state that I was in for many, many years back through the 80s and 90s, people didn't have to have licenses to be psychotherapists, to hang a shield that says I'm a psychotherapist. So they could do private practice that way because there was no regulation. But then they did put regulation in, and then it forced a lot of those people to shut down. But when you're dealing with stuff like where you're in a clinic and you have the top guy, right? The reason the whole thing is narcissistic / psychopathic because you have it's playing off of each other, meaning that the top guy is the one who's going to be held accountable for what happens to the people, the other therapists who are underneath him. So it doesn't benefit the top guy to scold or reprimand his lower psychotherapist. He'll just basically brush it under the rug if you complain about it. Why? because there shouldn't be any evidence, there shouldn't be any evidence that this person abused you, because it's going to go up to the higher up and he's going to be investigated. And then that'll open a whole can of worms right there, right? So they don't want that. They don't want that. So what do you think? What do you think is going to happen to your complaint? Yeah. Oh, what was that? No, nobody's going to hear about it. Okay, even if you left, some people will, let's say you put a complaint in writing to, to his supervisor. And I've done this, by the way. If you put a complaint in writing, what they'll do is they'll put that letter in your file. They're not going to put that letter in the psychotherapist file. They'll put it in yours, because you're the one who's considered to be mentally ill. Okay? You're the one to blame from their perspective, of course. They're not held accountable. It's going to be a reflection on you if you complain. Well, you weren't cooperative. That kind of a thing. No, it was that the psychotherapist was incompetent. But they're not going to call themselves out on that, because the guy above, the higher up, doesn't want to be investigated. So you have this, the flying monkey dynamic right there, where they're going to hide each other's misgivings, and they're going to get rid of you. If you're complaining, they'll get rid of you. They'll gang up on you and they'll get rid of you, and they'll tell you, oh, maybe you need to go find somebody else. But the problem is that they're all trained the same way. And I will go into that in another video. Please subscribe and you can get all that whole series. Okay, I'm going to be doing a serious series about this. But anyways, so I continue. So this is dangerous. Agreed. I've often wondered how many clients have been driven to suicide from unethical, abusive mental health professionals. Oh, let's talk about suicide. Okay, couple of years ago, I was going through some severe emotional trauma, and it was really a response to PTSD. It was reactions because I had PTSD, but nobody seemed to diagnose that I had PTSD, but I was having these reactions, and the psychotherapist I was going to, and by the way, at that point, I had already came to the conclusion that psychotherapy wasn't necessarily the best thing. I was aware of it at that point, but I didn't know any other thing at the time. So I was using the psychotherapist for what she was good for. Basically just to talk it out. But the problem was that wasn't the solution, because I was still having anxiety attacks. So the anxiety attacks, she would say, well, if I'm not in to talk to, and by the way, she wouldn't talk to me outside of an official appointment. Okay. So I'm having an anxiety attack. She's not helping me. I'm calling her up. I needed to talk to you, She basically blows me off. And then she says, well, you know what? Go call the crisis line. Okay. So I call the crisis line. They send out people, but you know what the truth is? They don't know how to handle anxiety attacks either. I'm serious. And you know what they tell me? You need to call your therapist. Yeah. So the therapist tells me to go call the crisis line, and the crisis line people tell me to go call the therapist. Okay, I mean, come on. Really? I mean, nobody knows how to handle an anxiety attack. You guys have all this degrees and all that crap, and you can't handle an anxiety attack? Really? Oh, come on. So dangerous, he says, I've often wondered how many clients have been driven to suicide from unethical, abusive mental health professionals. I mean, a lot of it, what I've just described to you is basic incompetence. And I don't necessarily think it's totally unethical, of course, absolutely. But I think it's a lot of incompetence. They don't know what to do, or maybe they're not allowed to do certain things. So they just kind of blow it off to the next person. And it goes back and forth in like a ping pong ball. Oh, you need to talk to your psychotherapist. Oh, you need to call the crisis line. Why? Because the psychotherapist didn't know how to deal with anxiety attacks. And the chick that I had gone to at the time, she when I finally did get my appointment, she was very casual, and she goes, well, yeah, I got your message, but we didn't. I'm only really going to talk to you during our time. She won't pick up the phone and call you to help you in terms of soothing whatever the issue. And don't get me wrong, I can probably understand her point now that the anxiety attack has passed, but we didn't resolve anything in terms of her providing me with any type of way of soothing those anxiety attacks. She didn't give me any skills. She didn't teach me nothing. It was just like this lounging, loud type of, oh, yeah, I got your message. So what's the problem? Okay, this is like 3 days later. So, and the funny thing was, as I said before, I was using her for what she was good for at that point, because I really didn't have a lot of, at this point in my life, based on the experiences that I've had with psychotherapists, I don't have a big expectation of them. Every single one of them are totally incompetent when it comes to handling an anxiety attack, which is very basic. I would think a lot of clients have anxiety attacks. And anxiety and depression are one of those things that people go to psychotherapy for, right? You would think. And that they would be able to handle that. But no, not even the crisis workers knew how to handle an anxiety attack. Please. And I had been having anxiety attacks for several weeks at a time. Okay? And through the crisis workers, they started to get to know me, because I had actually gone through the whole list of crisis workers that they had on duty. And at that time, I'll go into another video about how I learned how to handle my anxiety later. I just want to address this first. So I do totally agree with you, Scott. So would you think, okay. You would think many of these people get into this profession to help the vulnerable and hurting, but I think a lot do it for their own egos. Yeah, I agree with that. But I also think that there's many of them, I think when they first started out, they actually had good intentions. Like, the saying, oh, I want to help vulnerable and hurting people. But they, at the same time, they were trying to seek help for themselves. And they thought, maybe if I study psychology, I can heal myself and then I can turn and help others. That's probably a lot of the thinking. Because when I was a student in college, I would join these support groups. And they had college, students come together in support groups. And a lot of the ones that joined the support groups were psych majors. And, they would say, things like, they were the ones in the psychotherapy, the psych support groups. And they said, I needed support, and, I have this kind of issue. And a lot of them had depression and that kind of stuff. And I was thinking, is this like the healthiest thing for you to be going into if you have depression and anxiety and stuff like that? I mean, I think it would be better for you to go into some kind of other thing that would be more happy, that as opposed to dwelling into the same stuff. But the intention that they kind of expressed, and I'm not going to say that these people were narcissistic. I think at the time that they went into this field, they had this very idealized idea that, oh, I will help the vulnerable, and at the same time I may be helping myself, because I'll learn all about all this stuff, and then I can apply it to myself, and then I can turn around and help others, you see. I think that was the thinking, okay? However, the structure of psychotherapy, the structure of psychology, the whole shebang, the whole mental health system is narcissistic in its own right. Okay, so even with the goodest intention, when you go into this field, it becomes corrupted. Okay, and I will go into that in another video. This is a whole series, so stay tuned. I suggest you subscribe. Okay, so the other factor is the training they get, which just reinforces a stigmatized view of their clients. Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I recently, I mean, not recently, it was about maybe 2 years ago. I had this, the therapist I had just talked to you about, the one who is like, blah, 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 kind of a person. She was the last therapist that I had. And she was kind of mediocre. I mean, she wasn't totally bad, but there was certain things that I didn't particularly like about her. But when they handed me the papers to sign to be part, because they have give you know, it's a doctor's visit, right? So you have to sign these papers. They referred me also to a case manager. Okay, so when I talked to the case manager, which is an outsourced thing of this whole city's or state system trying to address mental health, right? She hands me these papers that I have to sign, tons of papers that I have to sign to release them from liability, just in case I kill myself. But they don't refer to me as a client; they refer to me as a consumer. Oh, now I've been reduced to a consumer, as opposed to a client. Interesting. So let's talk about stigma at that point. Now, the term consumer, I at the time, I don't think it was appropriate for the type of business that it is. The client is probably more appropriate. But they said, yeah, I told the case manager, I said, I don't like being referred to as a consumer. I'm not a customer. Am I a customer? I thought I was a client, a patient or whatever, And the answer, she says, yeah, I've heard that before. People think it's demeaning. But yet they did it anyway. How do these people with their nice high degrees and everything like that not see that calling somebody a consumer in this context is demeaning? Okay. Go figure. But I did write it on the paper. I said, I find this demeaning, this term, and please, don't refer to me as a consumer. I'm a human being. So anyways, as far as I'm concerned, this whole profession needs to be done away with. And the pseudoscience view of what is considered mental illness. Absolutely, Scott. Nicely put. Thank you. This whole little comment that he put up here reminded me of a book. Recently, I actually found this book. Somebody had suggested it a while back to me, and I never got around to reading it. And finally, I bought the audiobook. And it's by a guy named Thomas Saz. And the funny thing about this guy, I did a little research on him. I mean, he had been around, he became a psychologist. He infiltrated the whole academic side of, psychiatry or psychology. And his whole point of becoming a psychologist was to expose the profession from the inside. And he's written like 35 books exposing psychiatry and psychology for what it is. And this is one book that I had recently read, and I linked to it in my description box. It's called Psychiatry, the Science of Lies. And he basically talks about, and by the way, I had already done a lot of research on the history of psychotherapy and where it came from, and how psychology evolved and such that. And the psychotherapy model came out of the mind of Sigmund Freud and what's his name? Carl Jung. More Sigmund Freud though. And Sigmund Freud himself was a narcissist. He coined the term narcissist. Who else better to talk about narcissism than a narcissist, right? Yeah, so I'm going to go into another video, which will break that down. Okay, so, but here's the book, and I'll link to it in the description. It's called The Psychiatry, the Science of Lies. And the other book I recently read from him was called The Myth of Psychotherapy. And the whole title is Mental Healing as Religion, Rhetoric, and Repression. That's the whole title. So I will link also to that one. But anyways, this is everything that he talks about in this thing, in these books, is flat out reaffirmed what I had deduced from my many 20 years, actually 25 years. I had been in psychotherapy for at least 25, more than 25 years. And off and on, with at least maybe over 10 different psychotherapists. Okay. And I can't say that any of them, were exceptional. The last one that I had, I'll give her points for the fact that she identified that I had PTSD. Okay. The one prior to her was I had a social worker, and she had the audacity to put it in my record that I was a borderline. And, because I was having anxiety attacks and such, and I was seeking help for that kind of thing. And I will go into her in another video. I don't want to go off on a tangent. But anyways, let me go up now to another comment. Here, this was 7 months ago. I think I responded to this one, but a lot of people seem to like this one. And yes, I totally agree with this one also. Cal Frank, I believe it is. This profession, for the most part, needs to be terminated effective immediately, because therapists either fail because they're dumb and incompetent, or they cause people to develop PTSD and other forms of mental damage. And sadly, since a good portion of them are narcs who love victim blaming, I'm sick of the deflective excuses saying responsibility this and that when they don't know shit about responsibility. Exactly. Thank you. And making people worse. Sorry, I should have completed that sentence when I said it. This profession needs a reform, and people who want to have a license need to be screened harshly. Narcissists need to be treated like second-class citizens at this point. I know that may sound extreme, but narcissists have no business in this shitty profession. And narcissists could never, ever be employed anywhere else, nor should narcissists have children. Again, I know it sounds extreme, but that mental health profession is more dangerous than anything else. People don't go to therapy to be harmed. They go to get better and improve. But these quacks use abusive tactics and try to disguise it as helpful. Shut it down now. And then after a proper reform shall it be reinstated, but in all seriousness, this profession needs to be illegal. Yep. I totally agree with you. All the way down to the fact that this whole thing needs to be shut down. Okay. I totally agree with you. However, the problem is that it's big business. Okay. Particularly for big pharma. And regarding things like antidepressants and psychotropic drugs. That's the reason this whole shit is still around. And the fact that they're they're actually traumatizing people with PTSD, that creates the market for the need for the medication. You get what I'm saying? Meaning that if they're keeping you stuck in your story, keeping you stuck depressed, not helping you through the anxiety attacks, not teaching you skills. I mean, seriously, they don't teach you any skills on how to handle your anxiety attacks. How simple can it be? Right? And I'm going to tell you again, I don't want to get off the tangent. It can be learned how to get control of one's anxiety attacks and depressions and all. It can be learned. It can be. They can teach you the skills. They don't take the time to do that. What they do is they sit there and they let you run through the story over and over again of how, you were abused by your narcissist or by the system or whatever. Okay. And you sit there, and by the time it's all over, you're not any better or off than when you started. You might feel a little relieved. Oh, I feel better now that I talked about it. Right. But it's only temporary. did you solve the problem? Part of the, I mean, there's a lot of solutions that really need to be, that could be there, okay? But psychotherapy, the mental health system in itself, is part of the problem now, because talk about a false sense of security. You know, it's like giving the impression to society that, oh yeah, you know, you need to go talk to a therapist or a counselor, and that'll solve my problem. Really? Do we know that? Is that what that is? The truth is, it doesn't solve your problem. It just goes around in circles. For 25 years, I went around in circles. And after it was all over, I had to go find my own. I had to go out and look for my own alternatives to the crap. And I'm gonna tell you, it does have a purpose. I mean, in a sense of, in the moment when I was having the anxiety, talking to somebody did help, but it didn't resolve the issue. And by the way, I want to, if you guys have any, if you guys have your own opinions about what's going on here, feel free to share your story if you wish. I had another one here. I don't remember if it was, I couldn't find it. But there was another message. I don't know, maybe she sent it to me in private messaging, but there was another one where she talked about a psychotherapist who was making advances, I think. And she says, well, so what about, she was saying, so what about narcissistic therapists? The one I had was a psychopath. Well, first of all psychopaths are narcissists, and not all narcissists are necessarily psychopaths. However, but they could definitely be groomed to that upper level of psychopathy, in my opinion, particularly with the mental health profession. Okay, so that's it for this video. I do recommend that you subscribe, and so for the next video, which I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be breaking this down, this whole topic of psychotherapy, and the things that are wrong with it, and why I really don't recommend psychotherapy for being, you know, cured or healing from narcissistic abuse. It's not, I really don't believe that it's the way to go. And I will explain that in upcoming videos. So thank you for listening. Please subscribe, and I will see you on the next video.